On the eastern edge of Gotham City, where the road runs out and the tree line begins, there is a building that the city does not like to look at directly. It sits on a hill above the river. Stone walls the color of old bone, gone dark with a century of rain. Gothic towers rising into the fog. Gargoyles on every corner, mouths open, watching the city below with the permanent, patient expression of things that have seen everything and expect nothing to improve. At night, the lights in its windows glow a dim and institutional yellow. Not warm, not welcoming. The kind of light that says the building is occupied, not that anyone inside it is glad to be there. From the river road, in the fog, with the rain coming down the way Gotham rain always comes down, like the city itself is crying and too proud to stop, the building looks like something a troubled child drew to illustrate the word lonely. It was built to heal. That is the thing people forget. Standing at the gate, looking up at the towers, reading the name carved in stone above the entrance, Elizabeth Arkham Asylum for the criminally insane. It is very easy to forget that this building began as an act of love, that the man who built it lost everything he had ever loved to madness and poured his grief into limestone and steel, and the conviction that if he built the right walls, put the right minds inside them, asked the right questions in the right rooms, madness could be met on its own ground and defeated. He was wrong. The building knows it. The walls remember every patient who arrived here hoping to leave different and left exactly the same, or worse. The gargoyles have watched a century of good intentions carried through the front gate and set gently down somewhere inside, and never seen again. But this is not a story about failure, or not only. It is a story about a house, and the family that built it, and what the house did to them in return. It is a story about the doctors who came to cure their patients, and found, in the long corridors and the small rooms and the particular quality of quiet that settles over this building at 3 a.m, that the line between healer and patient is thinner than any of them imagined. It is a story about the most famous address in Gotham City, the one every criminal knows, the one every cop has driven past in the rain, the one that appears in newspaper headlines so regularly the typesetters keep it in a standing block, and what it means that this place exists, and keeps existing, and keeps failing, and keeps being rebuilt. It is a story about a city that decided its monsters deserved better than death, and it begins the way all the darkest Gotham stories begin. Not with a crime, and not with a cape, but with a child, and a mother, and a house on a hill in the rain. Get comfortable. Pull the blanket a little higher. Tonight, we are going inside Arkham Asylum, and we have all night. If this kind of slow journey through dark history helps you rest, a like and subscribe cost you nothing, and drop your location in the comments. I always love knowing where in the world people are listening from tonight. Chapter 1 begins now. His name was Amadeus Arkham, and before he built the asylum, he lived in it. That sentence needs a moment to settle, because it is one of the stranger facts in all of Gotham's long and strange history. The man whose name is carved above the entrance to the most famous asylum in the world grew up in the building that would become that asylum. He was not born there, but the house, the great old family estate on the hill above the river, was his childhood home. He played in its corridors. He learned to read in its library. He watched the seasons change from its windows, and his earliest memories, the very first ones, the ones a child carries without understanding why they have stayed so long, were of his mother. Her name was Elizabeth Arkham, and she was not well. Amadeus understood this the way children understand things that adults try to keep from them, in fragments, in silences, in the things that changed when his mother walked into a room, the way certain conversations stopped, the way his father's face rearranged itself into a careful, neutral expression that meant nothing was wrong, and therefore something was. The way the maids moved around Elizabeth Arkham when she was having one of her episodes, giving her space, giving her time, waiting with the practiced patience of people paid to wait. What Elizabeth Arkham suffered from, exactly, was never captured in a clean diagnosis. The records of the time are imprecise in the way that records of mental illness in the early 20th century were almost always imprecise. More description than classification, more observation than understanding. What the records say, in the careful language of a family that was part of Gotham society and had a reputation to manage, is that Elizabeth had periods of great distress, that she experienced visions, that there were days when she could not locate herself in time, when she believed she was somewhere else, someone else, the person she had been before marriage, or before loss, or before whatever it was that had fractured the architecture of her mind. And there were days that were worse than that. A detail worth noting about the house in which Amadeus grew up, because the house matters in this story in a way that houses almost never matter. It was large. Not ostentatiously so, not in the way of the great Gotham fortunes, but large enough that a child and a suffering mother and a father who travelled often for his business could go days without crossing the same corridor. Large enough that the rooms had a particular relationship with sound. Some rooms absorbed it entirely, so that you could stand in the centre and clap your hands and hear nothing bounce back. And other rooms carried sound from one end of the house to the other, channeled along the walls, so that a conversation in the kitchen could be heard, faintly and with strange distortion, in the master bedroom on the opposite wing. Amadeus grew up knowing which rooms did which. It is the kind of geography that a child in a difficult house develops without being taught. The map of where to go to be alone and unheard, and the map of where to go to hear what wasn't meant for him. He loved his mother. This is worth saying plainly, because it would be easy to construct a story about a man who feared his mother, or resented her, or was damaged by her in the ways that simplified psychology likes to suggest. The truth is simpler and sadder. He loved her very much. He spent his childhood finding ways to make her laugh. Small ways, the accumulation of small ways that a child uses when the large ways are unavailable. And the days when she laughed were the best days, the days when she was entirely herself, entirely present, sitting in the garden in the afternoon light with her hair down and her voice clear, were the days he measured all other days against. They were not enough days. He went to university in England, medical school. He was, by all accounts, a serious student, the kind who finds in academic work the particular comfort of problems that have solutions, of questions that have answers if you ask them correctly and in the right order. He wrote letters home. His mother wrote back, in the days when she could. His father wrote the rest of the time, explaining in careful language that left a great deal between the lines. What is worth holding on to, as you drift, is what Amadeus Arkham chose to study. He could have taken any direction that medicine offered him. He had the mind for all of it, the precision for surgery, the patience for internal medicine. He chose psychiatry. He chose the branch of healing that sits closest to the thing that frightened him most, the branch that deals in the territory where his mother lived, where the geography of a mind loses its reliable landmarks and a person finds themselves walking in a landscape they no longer recognize. He chose to study the thing he was most afraid of because he believed, with the particular stubbornness of the young and the brilliant, that understanding it was the first step to defeating it. He was going to defeat madness. He was going to do it for his mother. He spent years training in England, training in Europe, learning from the best minds in a field that was itself still very young. Psychiatry in the early 20th century was barely a generation old as a formal discipline, still working out its vocabulary, still arguing about whether the mind was a thing that could be treated or only observed and managed. Amadeus read everything. He argued with everyone. He developed, in the academic community where he was beginning to make a name for himself, a reputation for intensity that some of his colleagues found inspiring and others found slightly alarming. He was, they said, the kind of doctor who takes his patients home with him. Not literally, but in the sense that he could not leave their suffering at the clinic door. It followed him. He let it. In 1920, he received a telegram from Gotham. His mother had taken a significant turn. His father believed he should come home. He came home. And what he found, when he arrived at the old house on the hill, was worse than the careful language of his father's letters had prepared him for. Elizabeth Arkham had declined past the point where the family's private management could contain her. She was not violent, she was not a danger to anyone, but she was very far away, further than she had ever gone before, living in a reality that touched the one her son occupied only at its edges, and those edges were fraying. He cared for her himself. He moved back into the old house, the house of his childhood, the house where the sounds travelled strangely along the walls, and he became his mother's doctor as well as her son. He sat with her. He talked to her. He applied everything he had spent years learning in the careful rooms of European clinics to the particular problem of the woman who had given him his first understanding that the mind was a place that could be lost. He could not get her back. The exact details of Elizabeth Arkham's death are recorded in her son's journal, a document that would become famous much later, for reasons that have nothing to do with the entry about his mother. She died in her own bedroom in the spring of 1921. The official cause of death listed in the family records is listed as illness. The true cause is recorded in Amadeus's handwriting, in language so spare it reads like a man writing around a wound he cannot bring himself to touch. He was the one who found her. He was the one who had to understand, standing in her room in the grey morning light, that the thing he had spent his entire adult life training to defeat had reached into his own house and taken the person he loved most. And standing there, in the house that had already been a kind of prison for both of them, his mother held by her mind, himself held by his inability to fix it, Amadeus Arkham made a decision. He was going to rebuild the house. He was going to fill it with doctors and treatment rooms and the most advanced thinking in psychiatric medicine that he could assemble. He was going to do what he could not do for his mother, for other people's mothers, other people's family members, the people that Gotham's society preferred not to think about too directly. He was going to take this house, with all its darkness and all its complicated grief, and he was going to make it into something that healed people. The Elizabeth Arkham Asylum for the Criminally Insane, named for his mother, built in her memory, built to succeed where he had failed her, built to heal. The construction took most of 1921. The asylum opened its doors to its first patients in the winter of that year, and on the day it opened, standing at the gate in the December cold, watching the first patients arrive, Amadeus Arkham believed entirely and without reservation that he had done something that mattered. He had no way of knowing what the building was about to do to him. Chapter 2 is next. Before we follow Amadeus into what the building became, it is worth spending a little time with what he built, because the asylum, as a physical place, is a character in this story. And like all the characters in Gotham, it has a history that explains a great deal about its behaviour. The house that became the asylum was already old when Amadeus converted it. The Arkham family had owned the property since the mid-19th century, one of the original land grants from the period when Gotham was being built outward from its colonial core,
when wealthy families were establishing themselves in the hills above the river, with the particular urgency of people who understand that geography is a form of social argument. The house said, "We have been here a long time. We have enough money to build high. We are the kind of family that endures." It was built in a Gothic revival style that was fashionable in the mid-1800s. Pointed arches, heavy stone, steep roof lines designed to shed the Gotham rain rather than catch it. Gargoyles at every corner, looking outward. Not decorative in the original sense. Gothic gargoyles are functional. Waterspouts designed to channel rainwater away from the foundation walls.
Though by the time the Arkham house was built, the practice was primarily decorative, a visual vocabulary borrowed from medieval cathedrals. A statement that said, "We know what old things look like, and we wish to look like one of them." When Amadeus converted the house into an asylum, he kept the exterior almost entirely intact. The modifications were internal: treatment rooms carved out of what had been drawing rooms, cells constructed in the east wing where servants' quarters had been, a clinical reception area installed in the entrance hall that had once hosted his parents' formal dinner parties. He added a new east wing, purpose-built in the same Gothic style as the original house, connecting it to the older structure with a covered walkway of stone and glass that became, in the asylum's later life, one of its most distinctive features. A long, dim corridor connecting the old part of the building to the new, where patients were walked in groups for their daily exercise in the winter months when the grounds were too cold to use. A mainstream historical fact about Gothic architecture that is worth understanding in the context of Arkham Asylum. Gothic architecture was designed, in its medieval origins, to provoke a specific emotional response. The pointed arches drawing the eye upward, the high vaults that made the human body feel small, the quality of light filtered through colored windows, all of it was engineered to produce a sense of being in the presence of something larger than yourself, something that transcended ordinary life. It was designed to humble, to awe, and, in its best versions, to comfort. The comfort of feeling held within something vast and ancient and indifferent to your particular problems. Amadeus Arkham chose to build his healing institution in a style designed to make people feel small. Whether this was an oversight or an instinct is a question his journals do not answer directly. But the effect is real, and anyone who has stood in the entrance hall of Arkham Asylum and looked up at the vaulted ceiling 2 floors above them has felt it. The particular quality of space that says, "You are not the largest thing here. The building is. And the building has been here longer than you, and will be here after you are gone, and your madness, however large it feels from the inside, is just one more thing this place has seen before." Some patients find this comforting. The ones who have been made too large by their minds, whose thoughts and fears and obsessions have expanded to fill every available space until there is no room left, sometimes find that Arkham's architecture provides a kind of counterweight, a reminder that the world is larger than the interior of any one person's head. Others find it the opposite of comforting, and the history of Arkham Asylum suggests that, on balance, more patients fell into the second category than the first. The asylum opened, as mentioned, in the winter of 1921. Its first intake was modest, a dozen patients, transferred from the overcrowded public psychiatric facility on the other side of Gotham, chosen by Amadeus himself from the case files he had spent weeks reading in preparation for opening. He wanted to begin with manageable cases, people who were suffering, genuinely suffering, and who deserved more than the institutional neglect of the state facility, but people whose conditions were not, by the standards of the day, considered beyond treatment. People he believed he could help. What is worth holding on to about those first patients is that they were, for the most part, ordinary people. Ordinary in the sense that none of them were famous, none of them were dangerous in any public sense, none of them were the kind of patients that Arkham Asylum would eventually become synonymous with. They were people who had been broken by loss, or by poverty, or by illness, or by the particular cruelty that life sometimes visits on perfectly ordinary minds without warning or reason. Amadeus knew their files as well as he had ever known anything. He believed in his ability to help them. For the first several months, the asylum functioned more or less as he had imagined it would. Patients arrived, they were assessed, treated, monitored. Some of them improved. The routine of institutional life, meals at set times, scheduled activities, the small regularities that give a disordered mind something to organize itself around, helped more of them than it harmed. Amadeus wrote to his professional colleagues in England and Europe with a cautious optimism that was, for him, practically effusive. The work was good. The building was doing what he had built it to do. And then, in the spring of 1922, a request arrived that changed everything. The Gotham City Police Department had a problem. The city, as it would always be, was producing individuals whose crimes could not be cleanly assigned to the category of ordinary criminality. People who had committed acts of such extreme violence or of such apparently motiveless cruelty that the standard machinery of crime and punishment seemed inadequate. Not because these individuals were dangerous in the conventional sense, though many of them were, but because their danger seemed to come from somewhere the law did not have good language to describe. Their crimes had a quality, investigators used words like senseless or inexplicable or beyond reason, that suggested something had gone wrong in the machinery of their thinking in a fundamental way. The question of what to do with them, where to put them, how to manage them, what to call their condition, was becoming increasingly urgent. The police commissioner wrote to Amadeus Arkham. He had been following the asylum's progress in the city press, which had given it modest but favorable coverage. He had a proposal. Elizabeth Arkham Asylum had space that was not yet fully occupied. The city had individuals who needed somewhere to go. Would Dr. Arkham consider accepting a different class of patient? The criminally insane, the letter called them, a phrase that was legally useful and medically almost meaningless, but that served to describe the problem at hand. People who had committed crimes so extreme that the courts had declined to hold them fully responsible for them, having found in their examination that something in the defendant's mind had failed in a way that removed, at least partially, the ordinary calculus of choice and consequence. Amadeus Arkham read the letter carefully. He read it more than once, and he said yes. This is the decision that defined everything that followed. Not because accepting criminally insane patients was itself a mistake, the argument that these were people in need of healing, that the circumstances of a broken mind did not make someone less deserving of care, was sincere and arguably correct, but because the population of patients that began arriving at Arkham Asylum in the summer and fall of 1922 was fundamentally different from the population he had originally imagined treating. Not in degree, in kind. The man who arrived first was called Martin Hawkins. His crime is not worth describing in detail. What is worth noting is that when Amadeus Arkham sat across from him in the intake assessment room, in the careful, neutral light of that clinical space, and asked the standard questions in the standard order, Hawkins answered all of them, answered them clearly, answered them in sequence, answered them with what appeared to be a full and cooperative engagement, and that somewhere in the third hour of the assessment, Amadeus Arkham became aware that something in the room had changed. Not anything that Hawkins had said, not a physical change, a quality of the air, the particular texture of the attention being paid to him. The way Hawkins's eyes stayed exactly the same through every answer, regardless of what the question was. It was the first time in Amadeus Arkham's professional life that he had sat across from a patient and felt, genuinely felt, that he was in the presence of a mind that he did not have the equipment to approach. He wrote about it in his journal that night, briefly, 3 sentences. The last one reads, "He knew exactly what I was looking for, and he gave it to me. And none of it was true." This was the beginning. The patients kept coming. Through 1922 and into 1923, as the arrangement with the city became formalized and Arkham Asylum's role shifted from private psychiatric facility to something closer to a secure institution for the criminally insane, the character of the patient population changed in ways that Amadeus tracked in his journals with an increasingly strained clinical detachment. There is a quality to his writing in this period that his later readers and his journals would become very closely read by scholars, by the GCPD, and eventually by Batman himself, have described as a man walking a tightrope while pretending he is strolling a boulevard. The language stays professional. The clinical observations remain precise and structured. But underneath the structure, visible in the margins, in the unfinished sentences, in the places where the pen pressed harder into the paper than the words required, something else was happening. What is worth holding on to about Amadeus Arkham in this period is that he was trying, every day, sincerely trying. He was not a man who gave up easily, and the cases he was now managing were not cases that rewarded easy approaches. He read everything. He consulted with colleagues. He brought in experts from Europe to assess particular patients. He redesigned treatment protocols, adjusted medications, changed environmental factors, the light in certain rooms, the layout of the outdoor exercise areas, the timing of meals. He believed, with an intensity that his staff found both inspiring and slightly frightening, that there was an answer here that he simply had not found yet. A detail worth noting about the specific patient who changed everything: his name has been kept from the public record, obscured in the official files, and referred to in Amadeus's journals only by initials. What the journals say is this: he arrived in the winter of 1923, transferred from a temporary holding facility after committing a crime whose details sent the Gotham press into a sustained frenzy that lasted weeks. He was, Amadeus wrote on the day of intake, the most remarkable person he had ever met. He added, the following day, the most terrifying. Over the months of treatment that followed, Amadeus Arkham began what he later described as the most intensive therapeutic relationship of his career. He met with this patient daily. He kept detailed notes. He developed, he believed, a genuine understanding of the patient's psychology, its structure, its logic, the particular way it had fractured and reordered itself into something that was internally coherent, but externally catastrophic. He believed he was making progress. He believed the patient was responding to treatment. He was wrong. The patient was not responding to treatment. The patient was studying him. In the spring of 1924, Amadeus Arkham's wife and daughter came to visit him at the asylum. They had been living with her parents in the city. Amadeus, increasingly consumed by the work, had not been home as often as he should have, a situation he was planning to correct once a particular treatment phase was completed. His wife had suggested the visit. He thought it was a good idea. Arkham himself was not in the building when they arrived. He had been called to consult on a matter in another part of the facility. His wife and daughter were shown to his office to wait for him by a staff member who had no reason to think anything was wrong. The patient, whose initials appear in those journals, knew the building better than any of the staff believed. He knew the corridors. He knew the schedule. He knew when the staff member who should have been at the particular door in question was supposed to be elsewhere. Amadeus Arkham found his family in his office. He had 45 minutes with them before the discovery was made. Those 45 minutes are described in his journal in 2 words: too late. What followed for Amadeus Arkham is described in the clinical literature that later examined his case, because, yes, Amadeus Arkham eventually became a subject of clinical literature himself, which is perhaps the most Arkham thing that can be said about what happened, as a cascade failure. The grief came first, and it was total. Then the guilt, which was worse than the grief, because grief has no logic, and guilt does. He had brought that patient into his building. He had spent months in daily sessions with him, believing he was helping, while the patient was patient in the other sense, waiting, planning, learning the shape of the building and the schedule of the staff, and the days when Amadeus's family might be in reach. He did not leave the building. This is the part that sometimes surprises people when they hear it. Amadeus Arkham did not leave after his family was killed. He did not resign. He did not go somewhere else and try to build a different life. He stayed at the asylum. He continued working. He continued seeing patients, writing notes, attending the administrative functions of running an institution. His colleagues expressed concern. He thanked them for their concern and declined to discuss it further. What was happening inside him during this period, and it lasted years, is visible only in the journals, which became, in this phase, something quite different from the clinical observations of the early entries. The professional language was still there, but beneath it, something else had begun to surface. Not rage. He was not a man given to rage. Not despair exactly, more like a slow reorientation, the way a compass behaves when you bring it too close to something magnetic and it stops pointing where it should. He was still Amadeus Arkham. He was still the doctor, still the administrator, still the man who signed the intake forms and approved the treatment plans. But the thing that had oriented him, the belief that understanding madness was the first step to defeating it, the belief that his building was a place where healing happened, was losing its grip. He began to see patterns, not in the patients, or not only there, in the building itself, in the way the light moved through the corridors at different times of day, the way the sound carried along the walls in the same patterns he had noticed as a child, the way certain rooms had a quality to them that he could not precisely describe, but could feel, on the days when he walked through them alone. He began to wonder whether the house, the original house, the house his family had lived in, the house his mother had deteriorated in, had something in it that he had assumed was circumstance, but might be something more fundamental. Whether the building had a relationship with the minds inside it that was less neutral than he had always assumed. He began writing about it, not in the clinical notes, in separate journals, in handwriting that grew over this period, noticeably smaller, tighter, as if he were trying to fit more words into the same space, or as if the words themselves needed to be contained. He was not sleeping well. He was not eating with any regularity. His body, neglected in the way that a person neglects a body when the interior life has become too consuming to leave room for maintenance, was sending signals he was not paying attention to. His staff noticed. His staff also, correctly, found themselves uncertain about how to raise the subject with a man who was their employer, their director, and who carried with him at all times a quality of controlled intensity that did not invite well-meaning conversation about whether he was getting enough sleep. In 1929, the patient whose initials appear in those journals escaped. The circumstances of the escape were never fully explained in the official record. There were questions about whether certain doors had been left unlocked, whether certain staff members had made decisions that enabled the departure, whether the building's management had, in some sense, let him go. Amadeus Arkham conducted the investigation himself. His report concluded that the escape was the result of a series of procedural failures. He tracked the patient down himself, alone, without telling the police, without telling anyone on his staff. He found him in the neighborhood of Gotham where the patient had family, a neighborhood Amadeus had located through the patient's file, through his own memory of years of daily sessions, through the particular knowledge of a man who had spent months believing he was learning a patient's psychology and instead had been building a map of a mind that was now being used against him. What happened when Amadeus Arkham found his patient is recorded in the journal in 2 entries. The first is clinical, dispassionate. The second is not. After that night, Amadeus Arkham returned to the asylum. He went to his office. He locked the door. The following morning, his staff found him there, sitting in his chair, and understood immediately that the man they were looking at was not precisely the same person as the man who had left the day before. He was committed to his own institution. The paperwork was handled quietly by his most trusted staff member, with the kind of institutional discretion that Gotham's better families had always relied upon. He was admitted as a patient. He was given a room, not a cell, a room, in the East Wing, in the part of the building that he himself had designed. He had a window. He had his journals. He died in Arkham Asylum in 1951. He had been a patient for 22 years. He had been a doctor for fewer. The building outlasted him. It always outlasted them. And in the decades that followed, as Gotham changed and grew, and the particular quality of its criminal life evolved into something that no other city in the world quite matched, the asylum evolved with it. Or the asylum stayed the same, and everything that came to it changed to match it. After Amadeus, the asylum continued. This is the unremarkable but necessary truth about institutions. They outlast their founders. The idea, the building, the administrative structure, these things have a momentum that individual human lives, with all their crises and collapses, cannot fully interrupt. Amadeus Arkham went mad, was committed to his own building, and spent 22 years as its most famous involuntary resident. The asylum continued accepting patients. The staff who had worked under him continued their work. New staff were hired. New directors were appointed. The building kept its lights on. The decades between Amadeus's commitment in 1929 and the modern era that the comics reader knows, the era of Gotham's great villains, of the bat signal cutting through the clouds, of the name Arkham becoming synonymous with a particular flavor of darkness, are the least documented period of the asylum's history. Not because nothing happened, because what happened was, for the most part, ordinary institutional life, which leaves a thinner record than catastrophe. What is worth knowing about this period, in broad strokes, is that the asylum continued to serve its dual function, and that the tension built into that function, the tension between healing and containment, between the psychiatric model and the criminal justice model, between the building as hospital and the building as prison, did not resolve itself in the decades of Amadeus's absence. It deepened. A mainstream point about the history of psychiatric treatment in this era, the period between the 1920s and the 1960s was, by modern standards, not a good time to be a psychiatric patient anywhere in the world, and Gotham was not an exception. The treatments available, and treatments were not nothing, they were sincere attempts by people who wanted to help, included modalities that we now understand to have been somewhere between ineffective and actively harmful. Insulin coma therapy, electroconvulsive therapy administered without the careful protocols that make it relatively safe in modern practice. Certain pharmaceutical interventions whose effects on the mind were imperfectly understood. Surgical interventions, in the most extreme cases, that have since been recognized as violations of the basic principle that the first obligation of a healer is to do no harm. The staff at Arkham Asylum during this period were not, for the most part, monsters. They were people working within the understanding of their time, with the tools their time provided, doing what they believed was in the best interest of people they were responsible for. The fact that some of what they did was wrong in ways that the people being treated knew were wrong, even when the people doing the treating did not, is a tragedy of a particular kind. The tragedy of sincere people doing harm through insufficient knowledge and insufficient doubt. The building watched. The gargoyles on the corners took the rein. What changed in the post-war period, and this is the change that set the stage for everything the modern era would bring, was Gotham itself. The city was changing. Its crime was changing. The forces that had always made Gotham a more extreme version of every other city in the country, its geography, its history, its particular relationship with the corruption that seemed to grow in its foundations like mold, were producing, by the 1960s and 1970s, a criminal population that was different in character from what Amadeus Arkham had originally designed his institution to handle. Gotham was producing people who operated according to a logic that conventional criminality did not explain. People for whom crime was not a means to an end, but an end in itself, or something stranger than that, something that the language of criminality was not well designed to describe. People whose relationship with violence, or with fear, or with the symbolic meaning of their own actions suggested not ordinary greed or ordinary cruelty, but something more fundamental. A break in the architecture of meaning. A mind that had not simply chosen badly, but had reorganized itself around a set of premises so far from ordinary reality that communication between that mind and the ordinary world was possible only at the edges. Gotham was producing its villains, and its villains needed somewhere to go. Arkham Asylum was the answer. It was the only building in the city designed for exactly this population, the only institution with the legal status and the physical security to hold people who could not be held in ordinary prisons and could not be released. It expanded. New wings were added, new security protocols were implemented, then revised, then implemented again after the next breach. The building grew as the need grew, each expansion carried out in the same Gothic idiom as the original structure, so that the newest sections of the asylum looked as old as the oldest. The new stone weathered to match the original. The new gargoyles carved in the same style as the ones Amadeus had kept. The building ate its own history and made it look the same as it had always been. And then, in the early 1970s, a young man arrived in Gotham. He wore a cape. He had a particular relationship with the darkness. And his presence in the city, the shadow he cast, the fear he produced, the effect he had on the criminal ecosystem of Gotham in the years following his arrival, changed the asylum's population in a way that nobody had anticipated, and nobody, in the years since, has entirely been able to explain. Batman's Gotham produces a different kind of criminal than other cities. This is a fact that criminologists in the DC universe have written about extensively and have never satisfactorily explained. The argument goes, Batman arrived, and in the years following his arrival, the crime that Gotham produced became more elaborate, more theatrical, more, and this is the word that appears in the scholarly literature despite the obvious difficulties of using it about real crimes committed by real people, creative. As if Batman's presence had raised the stakes, or the temperature, or the voltage of the confrontation between order and chaos in Gotham City. And the response to that raised voltage was people who operated at a correspondingly elevated level. Arkham Asylum received the results. The building that Amadeus Arkham had designed for people whose minds had fractured in recognizable ways, the traumatized, the delusional, the violently impulsive, found itself in the era of the Batman housing a population that its founder had not imagined. People who were not simply broken. People who had built new things from the breakage. New logics, new vocabularies, new relationships with reality that were internally consistent and externally catastrophic. People who were, in some cases, demonstrably more intelligent than the staff treating them. People who could hold a conversation about their own psychology with a clinical precision that their doctors found both useful and deeply unsettling. The building adapted, or tried to, or looked like it was adapting while something else, something older, something in the stone and the corridors and the particular quality of light in the East Wing at 3 a.m, continued doing what it had always done.
In 1989, a graphic novel was published that changed how the world understood Arkham Asylum. It was called Arkham Asylum, a serious house on serious earth. It was written by Grant Morrison and illustrated by Dave McKean, and it is, by any reasonable assessment, one of the strangest and most beautiful things ever published under a Batman banner. It is also one of the most psychologically dense, a book that repays rereading in ways that most comics do not, that contains more ideas per page than most novels contain per chapter, and that approached the question of what Arkham Asylum really is with an earnestness of philosophical intent that is almost alarming in a medium that more commonly deals in punches. What Morrison understood and built into the structure of the book in ways both explicit and buried is that Arkham Asylum is not just a building where crazy people are kept. It is a building that has a relationship with the minds inside it. A building that participates in the pathology it is meant to treat. A building that is, in some sense, alive. Not in a supernatural sense necessarily, but in the sense that any structure shaped by human obsession and grief and madness over decades accumulates something that cannot be fully explained by the weight of the stone and the age of the walls.
The book tells two stories simultaneously. The present story. The Joker takes control of Arkham and demands Batman come inside. And the past story. Amadeus Arkham, told in journal fragments and flashback, building the asylum and descending into madness. And the architecture of the book mirrors the architecture of the building. The two stories are laid on top of each other, interleaving, the past bleeding into the present, the way the asylum's history bleeds into its present, so that reading the book produces something of the same experience that walking the corridors of Arkham is supposed to produce. The sense that time does not move cleanly here, that the past is not behind you, but around you, that the walls remember. A detail worth noting about how McKean illustrated the building. He drew it differently in the past sequences and the present sequences. In the past, the asylum is rendered in heavy, textured paint, almost physical, almost material. The kind of illustration that feels like you could touch the wall and find it damp. In the present, it is looser, more fragmented, more like a building seen through water or through the residue of someone else's dream. The building of the present is the building of the past, rendered uncertain by everything that has happened inside it. Morrison's Amadeus Arkham is a more complicated figure than the simplified version that sometimes appears in casual summaries of the character's history. He is a man who understands, early and clearly, that he is building on a foundation that is not stable. The house was his mother's prison before it was his asylum. The ground it sits on has a history. Morrison's book reaches toward the old stories of the land, the indigenous stories. The suggestion that some places accumulate weight from what happens on them that does not dissipate with time. Amadeus knows something is wrong with the place he has chosen. He builds it anyway, because he has nowhere else to put his grief. Because the alternative is to leave the house standing empty on its hill and let the grief stand empty with it. What Morrison's book also captures, with uncomfortable precision, is something that the asylum's later history makes impossible to ignore. The building's relationship with the people who run it is as complicated as its relationship with the people it holds. The line between keeper and kept, between the person who has the key and the person in the room, is one that the building does not particularly respect. It has been crossed in both directions more times than the official records acknowledge. Batman enters Morrison's Arkham through the front gate, having agreed to the Joker's demand, having chosen to walk in knowing that the building is being used against him, that everything inside is designed to take apart the particular structure of Bruce Wayne's sanity. And the book asks, without quite answering, whether the building has already done some of that work before the Joker said a word. Whether the man who walks into Arkham to face his villains is as safe in his own mind as he believes himself to be. Whether the discipline and the structure and the ironclad control that Batman brings to every situation is a form of sanity, or a more elaborate form of the same thing as what the people in the cells have. The inmates argue, in Morrison's book, that Batman is the crazy one, that the costumed vigilante in the Batsuit who descends from rooftops and beats criminals into unconsciousness as a response to personal trauma is at least as far from ordinary psychology as anything happening in the cells. Batman does not entirely refute this. He listens. He keeps moving, but he listens. The question the building keeps asking of everyone who passes through its gate is, where is the line? And the building's history, a century of people who were certain they knew which side of the line they were on, and who ended up on the other side, suggests that certainty itself might be the wrong answer. The architecture matters here in a specific way. Gothic architecture, as we have discussed, was designed to make the human body feel small, to produce a sense of scale that overrides the ego's tendency to assume that it is the measure of things. In a building designed to treat madness, this is either the most therapeutic possible environment, a constant physical reminder that the interior landscape, however vast it seems from inside, is not the only landscape, or the most destructive one. A constant undermining of the sense of self that is both the source of the problem and the tool that would be used to address it. Amadeus Arkham thought he was building a cure. He may have been building a machine that produces, in everyone who enters it, exactly enough disorientation to make the madness worse. The inmates of Arkham Asylum have expressed opinions on this question. They have expressed them at length, and with considerable articulateness, in the sessions that their various doctors have attempted with them over the years. We will visit some of those sessions and some of those inmates in the chapters to come. But first, it is worth spending some time with the doctors, the people who came to Arkham to help, and who found in the building and its population something that they had not prepared for. The history of Arkham Asylum is not only the history of its patients, it is also the history of the people who tried to treat them, who came to the building with training and intention and the particular confidence of someone who has spent years learning a thing and believes they understand it, and who found, in the particular ecosystem of Arkham, the weight of the building, the quality of its inmates, the specific challenge of sitting across a table from a mind that is both broken and formidable, and knows more about certain things than you do, that their training had not prepared them for this. The most famous of these doctors is Harley Quinzel, and her story is the most important one because it is the most complete. We know where she started, and we know where she ended up, and the distance between those 2 points is measured in the building she worked in. She arrived at Arkham as a psychiatric intern, young, brilliant, ambitious in the way that the best people are ambitious, which is to say that her ambition was inseparable from genuine curiosity and genuine care. She had excelled in her academic work. She was, her supervisors noted, exceptionally good with patients who were classified as difficult, the ones who resisted engagement, who tested boundaries, who used the tools of therapy against the therapist. She had an instinct for finding the real conversation underneath the performed one, for locating the thing a patient was actually saying beneath the thing they appeared to be saying. This instinct, which was a significant professional gift in most contexts, was something else in the context of Arkham Asylum. She requested, upon arriving at Arkham, assignment to a specific patient. The request was considered unusual. Interns did not typically make requests about patient assignments, but it was granted. The patient was the Joker. She has explained, in various ways and contexts over the years since, why she made this request. The explanations have varied in their level of candor and in their access to her own psychology at the time. The most honest version, given much later, goes something like this. He was the most famous patient in the building, the case that no one had cracked, the mind that had defeated every clinical approach attempted on it. She was 24 years old and excellent at her work, and she believed, with the specific confidence of someone who has never yet encountered a problem they could not solve, that she was going to be the one who cracked it. The sessions began. She wrote meticulous notes. She constructed detailed case conceptualizations, revised them as new information emerged, maintained the careful professional distance that her training had emphasized. She was thorough. She was rigorous. She was, by every external measure, doing everything right. She was also, from very early in the process, in a conversation she did not fully understand. A mainstream fact about the Joker as a psychiatric patient, one that his various doctors have all arrived at independently: he is not a passive subject of clinical assessment. He is an active participant in the process of his own examination, and his goals in that participation are not the goals that the clinical framework assumes. Most patients, even resistant ones, have some investment in being understood, some part of them that wants someone to see the thing correctly, even if other parts resist. The Joker's investment is different. He is interested in what the examination reveals about the examiner. He listens to the questions with a quality of attention that his doctors consistently describe as unusual, as if the question is the data and the clinical framework is the text that tells him who he is dealing with. Harley Quinzel asked excellent questions, and the Joker, who had heard many questions and whose interest in the people asking them was proportional to the quality of what they asked, began to pay a different kind of attention to her. What followed across the months of their sessions is documented in her clinical notes, which are, when read carefully with the retrospective knowledge of what happened, a record of two parallel processes: the official process, clinical assessment, hypothesis generation, treatment planning, and the other process, something much harder to categorize, which the building had seen before and would see again, which had to do with the particular vulnerability of a brilliant and empathic mind sitting across from a patient whose speciality was finding the gaps between what someone believed about themselves and what was actually true. She fell in love with him. That is the simple version, and it is not entirely wrong, but it misses the mechanism. What happened was more specific. He showed her herself in a way that no one else had. Not accurately. The image he offered her was a distortion, carefully calibrated. But it was the most interesting thing anyone had ever said to her about who she was, and she was at an age and in a place in her life where the most interesting thing felt like the most true thing. She helped him escape. She was removed from the program. She returned to him. She became Harley Quinn, Dr. Harleen Quinzel's doctorate applied to the problem of being someone completely different from the person who earned it. And the asylum had produced another transformation, another person who walked through its gates one way and came out the other. But Harley Quinn's story does not end in tragedy. This is the thing that separates her from most of Arkham's transformations, the thing that makes her, in the larger narrative, not just a story about how Arkham breaks people, but a story about how people can survive even Arkham. She left the Joker, eventually. Not easily, not cleanly, not once and for all. These things are never clean. But she left. She rebuilt. She found, in the years that followed, a version of herself that was not defined by what the building had done to her. The asylum does not always win. It is important to say this because the building's reputation would suggest otherwise. But Harley Quinn survived it. That matters. Hugo Strange did not survive it in the same way. Strange arrived at Arkham as its director, appointed to that position after several previous directors had left under various clouds. The building had, by the point of Strange's appointment, developed a reputation in psychiatric circles as a position that was professionally significant but personally demanding in ways that went beyond the ordinary demands of institutional leadership. Strange was considered an ideal candidate, brilliant, clinically accomplished, and possessed of a rigidity of self-concept that his appointing committee believed would serve him well in the particular environment of Arkham. They were wrong about the rigidity. What they had read as armor was a shell, and the building found the shell and pressed on it until it cracked. Hugo Strange became obsessed with Batman. This is the clinical summary, and it is accurate as far as it goes. But the shape of the obsession is more specific than the summary suggests. Strange did not simply want to defeat Batman, or expose him, or understand him in the way a scientist understands a specimen. He wanted to become him. He wanted the thing that Batman had, and what he had identified as Batman's defining characteristic was not the money, or the skills, or the darkness. It was the absolute certainty. The person who had looked into the worst thing and come out the other side still knowing exactly who he was. Strange had spent enough time in Arkham to no longer be certain of that about himself. The building does this to people. It is the specific hazard of working there, not the danger of the patients, which is real but manageable, but the particular kind of erosion that comes from spending years in close proximity to minds that have lost their organizing principle, their North Star, the thing that tells them who they are in relation to the world. It is difficult to spend that much time with that particular problem and not begin to feel it as a problem you might have, or might develop, or might already have in forms you have not yet noticed. Jeremiah Arkham is the last Doctor we will discuss in this chapter, and his story is perhaps the most painful, because he came to the building with the most impossible burden. He was an Arkham, a direct descendant of Amadeus, the great nephew of the man who had built the asylum and gone mad inside it. He came to it with the full weight of that history, and with the specific psychology of someone who has grown up in the shadow of a famous failure and has organized his entire life around the project of not repeating it. He ran the asylum for years. He worked harder than any director before him. He reformed its procedures, upgraded its security, improved its clinical standards. He was good at the job, genuinely good, in ways that the patients and the staff both recognized and respected. He also eventually became Black Mask. He was unmasked, his identity revealed, and he was committed to the institution he had run. The paperwork was handled, as it had been for Amadeus before him, with the kind of institutional discretion that Gotham's better families had always relied upon. The Arkham family had now given 2 directors to their own asylum. The building received them both with the same impartial stone silence. It did not distinguish between the people it was built to hold and the people it was built to run. It held them all. It was built to heal. There is a list. It exists in various forms, in the GCPD's records, in Arkham's own intake files, in the accounts of journalists and researchers who have tried over the decades to compile a definitive accounting of everyone who has passed through the building's gates as a patient. The list is long, and the names at the top of it, the most famous, the most repeatedly returning, are names that Gotham knows better than it knows most of its own history. Let us walk the ward tonight, quietly. The lights are low, the way they always are at this hour, the institutional yellow dimmed to something closer to amber. The corridors are quiet. The building breathes, the way old buildings breathe, settling and resettling, the stone contracting in the night cold, the sounds travelling along the walls in the patterns that anyone who has worked here long enough learns to read. The usual sounds, the not usual sounds, the silence that comes before. Edward Nygma arrived at Arkham not as a patient first, but as an adversary, the Riddler, who challenged Batman with the one thing Batman could not ignore, which was an unsolved problem. What is worth knowing about Edward Nygma, before and underneath the green question marks, is that he is a man who needs to be recognized for his intelligence more than he needs anything else. This is the wound at the center of his architecture.
Not the need to commit crimes, not the need to best Batman, not the aesthetic of the Riddle. All of these are in service of the need to be seen as the smartest person in the room, to prove, repeatedly and publicly, what he is privately terrified might not be true. His Arkham stays have been, by the institution's standards, relatively calm. He is cooperative in sessions in the way that a person who enjoys talking about themselves is cooperative. He is perceptive about other people's psychology, genuinely so, in ways that his treating doctors have found useful and occasionally unsettling. He does not, as many Arkham patients do, attempt to manipulate the doctors. He is above manipulation. He prefers open debate. He has, on more than one occasion, pointed out flaws in his own treatment plan that the treating doctor had not noticed, and been correct. He escapes when he decides to escape. No security measure devised for him has meaningfully delayed him when he has chosen to leave. He returns, eventually, through one of the various legal mechanisms that bring Gotham's villains back to Arkham: capture, surrender, court order. He has expressed, in various ways, a complicated feeling about the building. He does not enjoy it. He does not find it threatening. He finds it, he has said, unworthy of him, which is, for a building that most of its inmates find overwhelming or terrifying, perhaps the most Riddler possible response. Harvey Dent arrived at Arkham not as the villain known as Two-Face, but as the man who would become him. The transformation, acid thrown in the face of a promising district attorney, the scarring that removed half of his face's ordinary human symmetry, the psychological event that the physical event triggered, is one of Gotham's most discussed tragedies, in the specific sense that everyone discusses it, and no one can explain it. Why this? Why this particular physical trauma leading to this particular psychological outcome, when most people who suffer severe disfigurement do not organize their lives around the binary logic of a coin? The coin. It is worth dwelling on the coin for a moment, because it is the key to Harvey Dent in a way that no other detail is. Before the acid, Harvey Dent was a man who made decisions, clear, confident, morally grounded decisions, built on the kind of certainty that makes a good prosecutor and eventually produces a political future. After, he could not make a decision without the coin, without the pure randomness of the flip, without the removal of his own judgment from the outcome. There is a therapeutic framework in which this makes sense. The acid did not simply scar his face, it destroyed his confidence in his own judgment. It showed him, in one catastrophic moment, that the world could reach into the space between his choices and obliterate them, without warning or reason. The coin is not madness. The coin is the only honest acknowledgement of what he learned, that his certainty was always an illusion, that the flip of the coin was always what was happening underneath the appearance of reasoned choice, and that his particular damage made him unable to maintain the illusion anymore. His Arkham stays are painful to read about. He is not comfortable in the building. He is not comfortable anywhere. He is a man who is fully aware that he is not well, who engages with his treatment with genuine effort, who makes progress, real, observable, measurable progress, and then returns to Gotham and encounters something that reactivates the coin's logic and undoes months of work in a sequence of flips. His doctors find him, uniformly, one of the most sympathetic cases they have managed, and one of the most frustrating, because the sympathy does not translate into durability. He is always almost recovered. He never quite gets there. Jonathan Crane is different. The Scarecrow's relationship with fear, with the science of fear, with the experience of fear, with the specific biochemistry of the terror response that he spent his academic career studying and his criminal career weaponizing, is one in which the professional and the personal cannot be separated. He was afraid before he understood fear. He studied it to understand himself. Understanding himself made him more afraid of other people's fear, not less.
His Arkham stays are intellectually engaging in the way that conversations with someone who has genuine expertise in a relevant field tend to be. He knows more about the neuroscience of fear than most of his treating doctors. He discusses his own case with a clinical precision that is both helpful and entirely unhelpful. The precision is there, the insight is there, and the application of the insight to the project of getting better is entirely absent. He can describe with technical accuracy exactly what is wrong with him and why. He is not interested in fixing it. What he is interested in is the question of whether fear, in its pure form, is actually pathological, or whether it is the only honest response to the world as it actually is. He has a point. Arkham knows this and does not find the knowledge comforting. Pamela Isley, Poison Ivy, has the most specific and, in some ways, the most legible psychology of any of Arkham's long-term residents. She was a botanist before she was a villain. Her transformation, the accident that changed her biochemistry, the slow realization of what she had become and what that meant about her relationship with other people, is a story about connection and its loss. She cannot touch people in the ordinary way. Her skin has become a thing that harms, that transforms, that changes the chemistry of anyone who makes contact with it. Her care, and she is capable of care, genuinely and deeply, can express itself only through plants, through the green, growing things that respond to her in ways that human beings cannot. She is not comfortable in Arkham. The building does not have much green in it. She has requested, repeatedly, access to a garden. The security concerns have, repeatedly, made this difficult. The treating doctors who have advocated for her access to green space have generally been the ones who made the most progress with her. The ones who managed the security concerns without finding a way to accommodate the request have generally made the least. This seems like a small detail. It is not a small detail. It is the whole thing about Arkham Asylum, illustrated in a request for a garden. The institution knows, at some level, what its patients need. And the institution, at some other level, is not organized around providing it. Not because the people in the institution are cruel, because the institution is organized around the premise of security first, healing second, and security, by its nature, constrains the very conditions that healing requires. Oswald Cobblepot, the Penguin, is not, in most accounts, a man whose crimes stem from a diagnosable psychiatric condition in the conventional sense. He is a criminal. He is a businessman of a criminal kind. He is someone who has built a career on the intersection of crime and social status, whose relationship with violence is instrumental rather than compulsive. He arrives at Arkham when his crimes cross the line that the legal system draws between ordinary criminality and something requiring psychiatric evaluation, and he departs when the legal system draws a different line. He does not find the building traumatic. He finds it inconvenient. He has been, on more than one occasion, one of the most functional people in the building during his stays, organizing, socializing, conducting himself with the specific dignity of a man who believes that circumstances are external to the self and can be borne without allowing them to change anything fundamental. The Joker's relationship with Arkham is its own chapter. It is always its own chapter. His arrivals at the institution, his behavior during his stays, his departures, by escape, by legal proceedings, by some combination of the two that no official account fully explains, are the central thread of Arkham's modern history, the spine around which everything else organizes itself. We will not try to tell his story here, because his story is too large for a section. The Joker is the next chapter. The Joker is always the next chapter. But there is a patient who is not famous, who does not appear in the headlines or the legal proceedings or the accounts of the famous villains, and who is worth mentioning before we move on. Not because of what he did, the specific crime is not the point, but because of what his treating doctor wrote about him in the clinical notes. which are in the Arkham archive and have been read by the researchers who have spent time in it. The note says, "He came here believing he could be fixed. He spent 2 years here believing he was getting better. He left believing he was better. He was wrong. The building did not hurt him. The building did not help him. The building held him for 2 years in a condition that felt like progress and was actually stillness. He walked out the same person he walked in. I do not know if the building is at fault for this. I do not know if the approach was at fault. I find that I am increasingly uncertain whether I know how to distinguish between a patient who is healing and a patient who has learned to perform healing convincingly." The doctor who wrote this note left Arkham shortly after. She did not return to clinical work. In any other institution, a patient who escapes is a failure. At Arkham Asylum, an escape is a Tuesday. This is the dark joke that the GCPD makes about the building and has made for decades, and which is not really a joke because it is accurate. The rate at which Arkham's patients leave without authorization, through gaps in the security, through the manipulation of staff, through the simple act of breaking things until an exit appears, is, by the standards of any comparable institution anywhere in the world, extraordinary. Not every patient escapes. Some never try. But enough do, with enough regularity, that the phrase Arkham Breakout has its own category in the GCPD's filing system, and its own response protocol that can be activated in under 4 minutes. Why does the building fail to hold them? The question has been studied. The security has been upgraded repeatedly. New protocols have been implemented, tested, found wanting, replaced. The architecture has been modified, reinforced, supplemented with technology that would seem, on paper, to make escape considerably more difficult than it was in the previous generation of the building. And the escapes continue. Not because the security is bad, exactly, because the people inside the security are better. Because they are, in their various ways, exceptional people who have organized themselves entirely around overcoming obstacles, and the obstacles they now face are the ones that define their immediate environment. A detail worth sitting with. The people that Arkham holds are often more intelligent, more resourceful, and more motivated to leave than any institutional security system is designed to contain. Prisons are designed for people who are bad at other things, people for whom crime was the most accessible available option, not the result of a particularly sophisticated mind applied to a particular set of problems. Arkham's population is different. Its most famous long-term residents are people who, applied to any other field, would be remarkable. Edward Nygma would have been a formidable academic. Hugo Strange was a formidable academic. Pamela Isley was, before her transformation, one of the foremost researchers in her field. Their minds are the problem, and the problem is that their minds are very good at solving problems. But the deeper reason that Arkham fails to hold them is not the intelligence of its population. It is the structure of what Arkham actually is and what it is not. Arkham Asylum is a building. It is stone and steel and security protocol. It holds bodies. What it cannot hold, what no building can hold, is the thing that makes these particular people dangerous. The Joker's danger is not his body in a room. His body in a room is entirely manageable. His danger is the specific way his mind touches other minds, the effect he has on the thinking of the people around him. The building holds the body. The effect continues uncontained. This is the paradox at the heart of Arkham's existence. It is a physical solution to a non-physical problem. The madness is not located in the body. The body is just where the madness lives while it waits. And the people who have dedicated their lives to the study of madness know that bodies, detained or free, are not the variable that matters. What matters is what the mind does with the time it has. There is also a structural problem in the building's legal position that nobody entirely wants to discuss. The people that Arkham holds have been found by the courts to be not fully responsible for their actions by reason of insanity. This finding, which exists to protect individuals from punishment that is morally inappropriate given their psychological state, also removes from the institution the legal tools that would allow it to hold them longer when treatment fails. If a patient is not improving, which is the case by any honest assessment with the majority of Arkham's most famous long-term residents, the building cannot simply hold them indefinitely on those grounds alone. The legal framework requires a regular reassessment. The reassessment requires a finding that the patient is still dangerous. The patient who has spent months learning the behavior that the assessors are looking for can, with preparation, produce a performance that satisfies the criteria for release. Batman has, on various occasions, expressed a view about this cycle. He has argued, in the conversations he has had with the GCPD and with Arkham's administration, that the building needs more resources, different protocols, longer timelines. He has made these arguments while knowing, at some level he does not fully examine, that they are not the real answer. That the building is not broken. That the building is working exactly as well as a building can work when applied to a problem that is not, fundamentally, a building problem. He keeps sending them back anyway. Chapter 9 would explain why. This is the chapter that Batman does not discuss. Not because it is secret. It is not secret, in the sense that everyone who knows Bruce Wayne well enough knows the answer. But it is also the kind of thing that does not benefit from being said out loud very often. Because saying it out loud forces a confrontation with the logic, and the logic has a gap in it that he prefers not to examine too closely while he is in the middle of a fight. The answer is because the alternative is killing them. And Batman does not kill. This is the line, the foundational line, the one that was laid down in the alley where his parents died and has never moved. He does not kill. He will not kill. The violence he deploys is controlled, calibrated, designed to incapacitate rather than to end. He has trained himself to stop exactly at the point where more force would become lethal. And he applies that training in every situation, regardless of what the situation would seem to call for. Why? He has given various answers at various times. The practical answer, because killing is a path that has no end, and he does not want to be the person who decides which lives are worth ending. The moral answer, because the moment you make yourself the judge of who deserves to die, you have crossed into the territory that the people he fights occupy, and he is not interested in living there. The personal answer, the one he gives least often, because the boy who stood over his parents in Crime Alley decided, in the specific way that a child makes decisions that last a lifetime, that the world where people got to kill other people was not the world he wanted to participate in. And he has organized his entire existence around the project of not participating in it. The implication of not killing is Arkham. That is the logic. The Joker cannot be released into the city. He is demonstrably dangerous, demonstrably unable to not hurt people, demonstrably committed to his own particular project. He cannot be executed. That would require Batman to kill or to advocate for killing, which is the same thing. He must, therefore, be held. And the only holding that exists in Gotham that is appropriate to his particular condition is Arkham Asylum. So Batman sends him back. Every time. Knowing the rate of escape. Knowing the outcomes. Sending him back because the alternative is the one thing he decided in the alley at 8 years old that he would not do. There is a version of this that is admirable. The commitment to a principle under conditions that make the principle extremely expensive to maintain is one of the things that distinguishes Batman from every other figure in Gotham's ecosystem. Other people in positions of power in Gotham, the police, The prosecutors, the various paramilitary organizations that appear and disappear in the city's history, have made expedient choices, have decided that the cost of maintaining a principle was too high, and found a lower-cost alternative. Batman does not do this. The principle is the thing. And there is a version of this that is not wrong exactly, but uncomfortable, in the specific way that principled positions become uncomfortable when you look at them carefully. The Joker has killed hundreds of people. Across the decades of his career, the casualties accumulate into a number that is genuinely hard to hold in the mind. Each time he escapes from Arkham, and he will escape again, because the history of the building is unambiguous on this point, people die. The principle that prevents Batman from killing him is also the principle that sends him back to a building that cannot hold him. And the building's failure to hold him has consequences for specific people who are alive on the day he escapes and dead on the day after. Batman knows this. He has sat with this. It is, by the accounts of the people who know him well enough to have the conversation, the thing that weighs on him more than almost anything else. Not because he doubts the principle. He does not doubt it. He cannot afford to doubt it. The doubt would unravel everything. But because maintaining the principle requires him to live with the consequences of the building's failures. And the building's failures have faces. Arkham Asylum exists because Batman will not kill. If Batman killed, Arkham would be a smaller and quieter building. The wing that houses the most famous inmates would not need to be the size it is. The revolving door would not turn. The building is, in some sense, a monument to his restraint. And like all monuments, it stands there and reflects back at you something you may or may not be comfortable seeing. This is not an argument that he should kill. It is simply an honest account of what his choice costs, and where the cost goes. And the building stands on its hill above the river, and the lights glow amber in the fog, and the gargoyles watch the city in the rain. At 3 a.m, Arkham Asylum is a different place than it is during the day. The administrative functions have stopped. The treatment sessions are over. The building has been handed back to itself, to its night watch staff, to the sounds the stone makes when the temperature drops, to the particular quality of stillness that settles into a building where the people who are awake do not wish to make noise, and the people who are asleep are not entirely asleep. There is a room in the East Wing, the wing that Amadeus Arkham added to the original house, the one he designed himself, that the night watch staff avoid. Not because of anything that has happened there, not because of any documented incident, because of its quality. Its quality of quiet is not like the quality of quiet in the rest of the building. It is a quieter quiet, a more complete one. The sounds that travel through the walls elsewhere do not travel through these walls. Standing in this room with the door closed, you can hear your own heartbeat. It was the room that Amadeus Arkham designed as his treatment room, the room where he planned to do his most important work, the careful work of sitting across a table from a broken mind and helping it find its way back to itself. He treated 3 patients there before his commitment. He was the 4th. Certain members of the night watch staff have reported at various times over the decades the sense of being watched in the East Wing's corridor. Not the specific feeling of being followed by another person, the rational category that the fear of the dark usually maps to. Something different. The sense of a presence that is not a person exactly, but that has the quality of attention, that notices you. No investigation has found anything to explain this sense. No anomalous readings, no structural explanation, no evidence of anything in the walls or the floors that would account for it. The staff who report it are reliable, sober people who are not given to excessive imagination. The people who do not report it are equally reliable and equally sober. It is one of those things about Arkham Asylum that sits in the record without explanation, that the building offers without comment. that you accept or do not accept according to whatever framework you use for these things. What is worth holding on to is the simpler version. A building that has held this much concentrated human suffering across this many years from this many minds. A building that has been the site of grief and violence and transformation and the various catastrophic failures of human beings to heal each other has a weight to it. Not supernatural necessarily, just heavy. The way an old house is heavy. The way a place where important things happened is heavier than a place where nothing did. Grant Morrison's title for his graphic novel, A Serious House on Serious Earth, is a line from a Philip Larkin poem about a church. The poem argues that a church is a serious place because of what has happened in it, because of the accumulation of human need that has been brought to it over generations. A place becomes serious by being used seriously, by being the site of the things that people take most seriously: loss, hope, the desire to be different than they are. Arkham Asylum is a serious house. It was built to heal, and it has failed to heal most of what it was given. It has broken some of the people who came to it for help. It has broken some of the people who came to it to help. It has watched the same faces return through its gates across decades, unimproved, sometimes worse, always there again. It has been rebuilt and reinforced and administratively reformed, and it has continued to fail in the ways that it has always failed, with the patient indifference of stone. And it is also, and this is the part that gets lost in the ledger of its failures, the only building in Gotham City that was built on the premise that the people inside it deserved to be treated, rather than simply contained or punished. The only building that tried to say, whatever you have done, whatever your mind has done, you are still a person, and persons deserve to be treated as persons. And the correct response to the thing that is wrong with you is an attempt to understand it and address it, not simply an attempt to remove you from contact with the rest of the world. This premise has not produced the outcomes it intended, but the premise itself, the premise that Amadeus Arkham built into the stones of his family's house on a December day in 1921, when he was 28 years old and believed with all of himself that healing was possible, has not been abandoned. Not by the building. The building keeps it, the way old houses keep the things that were built into them, in the grain of the wood and the weight of the stone and the name carved above the door. Elizabeth Arkham Asylum for the criminally insane. Named for his mother. Built in her memory. Built in the conviction that what the world had failed to do for her, failed to do for him. Some other mind, sufficiently trained and sufficiently determined and sufficiently willing to sit across a table from the thing that frightened everyone and ask it questions, could do. The building does not sleep. Buildings do not sleep. But at 3 a.m, in the East Wing, in the room that has a quieter quiet than the rest of the building, something that is not quite awake and not quite asleep turns its attention, the way the building has always turned its attention, to the lights of Gotham visible through the high barred window. The city glows. The rain comes down. The gargoyles take the water in their open mouths and send it away from the walls. The building waits. It is very good at waiting. It has been waiting for 100 years, and the name above the door is still his mother's name, carved in stone, in the rain. It was built to heal, so let the building set you down gently now, where it found you. The tour is over. The corridors are quiet again. The night watch staff are making their rounds in the amber light, footsteps soft on the stone floors, and the building is doing what the building does at this hour, settling into itself, contracting in the cold, sending the sounds of itself along its own walls in the patterns that anyone who has been here long enough learns to read. Outside, Gotham is doing what Gotham does. The rain, the lights on the river, the particular quality of the city at 3 a.m, when the people who should be asleep are asleep, and the people who should not be awake are awake, and the balance between them produces a stillness that almost passes for peace. The gargoyles on the corners look out over all of it with the permanent, patient expression of things that have been watching for a very long time, and have stopped expecting things to improve, and continue watching anyway. Because watching is what they were built to do. Because the building does not permit a different posture. On the hill above the river, the lights in the windows glowing amber, the name in the stone above the door. It was built to heal. It has not always healed. It stands there anyway, serious house on serious earth, holding the weight of everything that has happened inside it, and the weight of everything that was intended, which is sometimes heavier, keeping its doors, keeping its name. And somewhere in the east wing, in the room with the quieter quiet, whatever it is that the room holds at 3 a.m, settles into something that almost resembles rest. Let your own weight settle now. Let the building and its history drift through you and then away, the way water moves through stone, leaving something behind, but leaving it clean. There is nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do. The asylum is on its hill, and the rain is on the gargoyles, and Gotham is guarded, and the long, dark history of Arkham is finished for tonight. Sleep well. The building will still be there in the morning. They always are. Good night.